Comparisons are an important part of media criticism. People watching a review, ideally at least, haven't played the game before, and they need a frame of reference. It's useful to compare, but at times, comparisons can just be weaponizing ignorance and using it to dismiss games and other pieces of media offhand. Within niche genres, it's not uncommon for the general public to have only played one game, and public perception is often filtered through that lens. The boss baby school of media discourse. The game we're talking about today is Alpha Centauri, which even favorable reviews will typically explain by calling it Civ 2 in space. I don't think the question of whether it deserves this moniker is really an easy one, and so I don't blame people for using it. But games are not just an amalgamation of mechanics. Games have a soul, and the soul of Alpha Centauri is something brilliant and unique. It is not just Civ 2 in space. They might have the same man's name on the box, but Alpha Centauri doesn't deserve to be cast in civilization's shadow. First, when we say Alpha Centauri is Civ 2 in space, it sounds like it's derivative, when actually the influence runs both ways. Let's take tile improvements as an example. At face value, you could say, yeah, these are just like tile improvements from Civ. But the improvements have different names, have different effects, there's different rules about where you can put them. The terrain itself is totally different, of course, and then there's all kinds of novel terraforming that you couldn't do in Civ 2, like changing elevation and digging up rivers. And this might pass you by, but Civ 2 and Civ 1 did not actually have workers or builders. Separating worker jobs from settlers was something that was first done in Alpha Centauri. Alpha Centauri was a groundbreaking game, and a lot of its new features were included in later entries of the Civ franchise. I'll list them off right now and let you decide for yourself whether you think it's a coincidence or whether later Civ games were taking ideas from Alpha Centauri. Introduced in Civ 3, we had the additional victory conditions, the existence of borders, and the worker unit. Civ 4 introduced civics. It added splash damage as an incentive to stop clumping up units into doom stacks. Civ 4 also made an effort to get rid of blank text from the tech tree, and introduced the World Council through the Apostolic Palace. Civ 5 gave buildings that offer flat increases to city yields, natural wonders, and also leaders that offer unique bonuses instead of traits. All of those features I just listed were in Alpha Centauri first. A lot of them seem like natural evolutions for the genre. I cannot imagine what the series would look like without borders, for example. But notably, the similar systems introduced in Civ 4 were very specific, to the point where I think for that game specifically, I do think there's a direct influence from Alpha Centauri. In my own review of Civ 4, I mentioned the civics system as one of its highlights, but that system is almost identical to Alpha Centauri's social engineering. Arguably, Alpha Centauri had more individual innovations that have stuck around in the Civilization series than some of the other official entries in the franchise. And as a result, I think that when we use language that implies that Alpha Centauri is derivative, we're doing a disservice to the legacy of the game. But it is like Civ 2, isn't it? Yeah, let's be real. It is. There are a lot of Civ 2-isms here, particularly the way that yields, citizens, and diplomacy work. But that's okay. These are tropes and shorthands from within the 4X genre that players would have been familiar with when they first bought the game, and it made sense not to deviate in these areas in a game that had so many deviations. It's normal. This is just what a genre is. Let me give you an example. Crow Team, a Croatian developer, worked with a very informal setup, basically out of their kitchen, and developed the first-person shooter Serious Sam. They were turned down by a bunch of publishers, but posted a single-level demo online to try to gain traction. There, it was picked up by a satirical review site called Old Man Murray. This site had a feature where they'd review FPS games based on how long it took them to find a crate. Crates were just such an omnipresent staple within the first-person shooter genre that the fact that there were 0 crates in this Serious Sam level earned a rare positive review from the site and made the game take off. My point is that even first-person shooters, a genre that is much less niche than 4X games, were subject to trends, patterns, and tropes. In fact, the term first-person shooter wasn't even used until the end of the 90s. Before that, they were called Doom clones. You see it again. The boss baby school of media discourse. Everything is filtered through a single lens. Back then, it was more expected and more tolerated by consumers for games to borrow mechanics and ideas from similar titles. Developers didn't have the resource to rework the wheel every time they put out a game, and players didn't have the patience to learn something completely new in an era before you had YouTube channels that would chastise you for not building enough workers. People still had an appetite for complex games, but this is what developers did. They expanded on ideas from games within the genre that came before. Civilization 1 was based on a board game. Even Dungeons & Dragons borrowed mechanics from an older game called Chainmail. This is true of other genres, like JRPGs, too. It typically took a few sequels before games fully started to occupy their own space. But Alpha Centauri never got that chance. Brian Reynolds went to work for Zynga on Farmville. There was no Alpha Centauri 2. The game is forever encased in amber, stuck in a semi-derivative state. Comparisons are not made at a level playing field. The elevation is uneven. You cannot construct a thermal borehole here. So what are the things that make this game so cool? Well, I mentioned a ton of innovations that were picked up by later games in the Civ franchise, but we have the newer Civ games and those are great. What else is there in Alpha Centauri? Well, a contemporaneous review from GameSpot highlighted drone revolts and the despotism penalty as the game's most impressive aspects. Wait, what? No, that's just mediocre stuff that came from Civ 2. And in fact, most of the worst stuff in this game is the stuff that comes from Civ 2. Not everything they took was bad. The wonders here and the videos that accompany them are really fantastic. And the Civ 2 style diplomacy here fits really well. A system like Civ 3's is great, but it's more open table, and they wouldn't have been able to write so many good quips with so much personality if they used Civ 3's system. But the mechanics from Civ 2 are not what keeps this game alive. The reasons that people are still absolutely feral for this game in 2024 are the things that make it unique.
Please don't go. The drones need you.
The storytelling, the personalities of the factions, the tone, the mood, the lore. And this is why the game deserved a sequel. It deserved several sequels. The lore has been talked about a lot, and I won't rehash it all here, but let me say that today, on the Alpha Centauri Discord, someone posted a 4,000-word piece of Alpha Centauri fanfic. Nobody is posting fanfic on the Civ 3 Discord. Same thing with the Call to Power Discord. This game absolutely cooked when it came to building characters and lore. And that's great, but what really sets Alpha Centauri apart is the ludonarrative consonance, the synergistic interactions between the story and the design of the game's mechanics. I'll give you an example of what that means. In Civ 3's industrial era, you unlock railroads, which gives you a massive movement boost, and doubles the output from your farms and mines. The game also, for the first time, makes it so that the best defensive unit is much stronger than the offense of any other available unit. Without massive amounts of artillery, it is difficult to take land from an entrenched foe. Combined, these mechanics simulate the Industrial Revolution, the ease of rapid mobilization, but also trench warfare. The game doesn't make you build trenches, it makes you feel the trenches. You find yourself using human wave tactics and heavily prioritizing military research to unlock the tanks and the planes that will break the stalemate. And that stuff is all over Alpha Centauri to an even greater degree. And here we reach the point where things stop being comparable, because the fundamental narrative that Civilization is trying to tell with its gameplay is radically different than what Alpha Centauri brings to the table. Civilization can be dark when you think about it, but not in a way that is really reinforced by the game's narratives. In Civ 4, you can sell your citizens into slavery. Civ 3 at times punishes you for having foreign citizens, giving you an incentive to starve the city, which is basically ethnic cleansing. In most Civ games, you can be a literal fascist, and in Civ 3, when you do so, you lose population in your cities. The darkness is there, but the game never makes you face the mirror and take a good look at what you just did. In Alpha Centauri, if you did something that removed population from all your cities, the game would call it an atrocity, and then Shinji Yang's smug face would appear on the screen, with a self-serving quote that made you feel icky inside.
The goals of the group and the greater race are transcendent, and to embrace them is to achieve enlightenment.
Even mundane bonuses in Alpha Centauri have horrifying in-world explanations. The holodeck-style happiness wonder gives you this cutscene. The dystopia of the self-policing colony just reduces your maintenance. Even with recycling tanks, the thing that is being recycled is human bodies. In Alpha Centauri, Soylent Green is made of people, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. And this is a very different narrative than what Civilization has to offer. The thesis of Civilization is basically that human history is an epic accomplishment, and it celebrates how we got here as a species. The thesis of Alpha Centauri is that humans destroyed the Earth, and we're going to do it again, in new and horrific ways. Maybe. And that maybe we can learn from our mistakes. and make something better. In this right, the game is incomparable to the Civ franchise. The tone is too different. Games are not just an amalgamation of mechanics. Games have a soul, and the soul of Alpha Centauri is something brilliant, something dark, and something unique. It's not just Civ 2 in space. This is not a review of the game, but I do think you should go out and buy and play Alpha Centauri. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time.